This image here is not that bad. The contrast between the object and the background seems like enough for automatic isolation. But if you run the threshold-based action, you'll see that the left side of the shirt is full of holes like an old sack, even if you go as high as 253 in the threshold prompt. And if you try and apply the changes, you get a total mess. So let's see if the two stages approach can do you any good in this situation. I'll run the action number 1 and set the threshold to 253. It leaves quite a bunch of trash on the background, but that's not the problem. The problem is this gap in the side. Now all I have to do is just grab a hard black brush or an eraser with a black background swatch and fill the gap. It's hard to tell where it ends, but I think about halfway to the top is okay. And while I'm at it, why not switch to white and erase the mess on the background, at least the biggest pieces of trash. It would only take a few seconds, as I don't need to come close to the edges. Don't worry about this weird pattern, as it's made of thin lines, the isolating action is able to handle that. Now run the action number 2 and enjoy. The isolation is almost perfect except for a couple of dots. With all the manual intervention, it's still much faster than using the pen tool for the whole process. This shoe is not easy to isolate without using the pen tool as well. The object is propped with some plastic thingy and the edge is not that definite. If you run the threshold-based action, it won't work too well. No matter what you put in the prompt, you get a mess. So let's try and use the separated version of the same action. I'll make a rectangular selection to get rid of the shadow and the plastic fixture, and run the action number 1. 250 in the prompt will do. I'll use a black brush to fill these two tiny gaps below, and I'll also erase what's left of the fixture, while making sure there are no holes in the edge. Now I'll run the action number 2. What we have here is quite a decent isolation. There is no trash on the background, and all that's left to do is just restore the shadow with a history brush. Now I'll resize and align the image so that you can see how it will look on an average online store website. This one is really bad. The upper edge of both shoes is hardly distinguishable from the background. But we always try our best to avoid using the pen tool. I'll make a rectangular selection and run the action number 1. After that, I'll use the black brush to fill in the gaps and holes. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it absolutely has to be fast. I'll run the action number 2 and restore the shadow with the restoration action and a couple of history brush strokes. It's not so bad, but the upper edge doesn't look well. Fortunately, it's easy to fix with large and hard history brush, just a few clicks and it's fine. After resizing and aligning the shoes, there's nothing left to do. There are probably a few dots left on the background somewhere, but even if so, getting rid of them will only take a few seconds. One last thing, it doesn't always go so smooth with the action number 2. As we're always trying to work as fast as possible, you might miss a gap or two, and it will ruin your isolation. So after I filled all the holes with black, I will run the action number 2, but instead of a nice smooth isolation, it just eats away half of the item. Something has definitely gone wrong, but it's too tedious to go back and meticulously search around the edge looking for gaps. They can be really tiny and not easy to find. So I'll use this little trick instead. Go back in history so that I'm able to do something about the image, and then apply some Gaussian blur, but the radius should be as small as possible, like 1. It will fill all the tiny gaps without any need for manual work. Now run the action number 2 again, and you'll get your image isolated in just a couple of seconds. The edge is all nice and smooth. Align and resize and you're finished. Better this than tracing the whole thing with the pen tool, right?